Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Harvard Islamic Study Circle HISC Seerah session 118, and this is a bit of an amalgam really of a few instances that sort of chronologically happen around about now, although not specifically straight after Banu Nadir, which is what we covered last week, and we talked about how the Prophet ﷺ expelled Banu Nadir after having laid siege to them, and that was because they had plotted to assassinate the Prophet ﷺ after he went there to ask for their support in some of the blood money with regards to the two deaths that Amr ibn Umayyah had done prior to that, after the massacres that happened that we talked previously about. So they had plotted to drop a heavy weight or a stone on the Prophet ﷺ as he sat outside the fortress. As the Prophet ﷺ came back, Jibreel tipped him off, the Prophet ﷺ left, and the Sahabi came back and laid siege. Abdullah ibn Ubay said that he would support Banu Nadir, but in the end he didn't. And Prophet ﷺ started to burn some of the palm groves. Then they surrendered and they were allowed to leave with all their possessions, and some of the houses that weren't badly damaged were given to the poor amongst the Muhajirin and a couple of the Ansar as well. One other thing that we didn't have time to really cover last week about Banu Nadir, or what happened sort of in this phase where they're being expelled and they're gathering all their things to leave. Some say that the verse that we're all familiar with, that there is no compulsion in religion, like Rafiddin, that was revealed that was revealed at this point in time, and there was a tradition that when the Arabs wouldn't have any male sons born, so they'd have lots of daughters, or they wouldn't have any sons, then they would vow, or the ladies would vow, that their next son, their next pregnancy, should they get pregnant again, if it's a boy, they will dedicate it to the Banu Nadir, as in they can adopt, Banu Nadir can adopt that child, so they will hand over that child, if it's a son, to Banu Nadir, and they would raise their sons in their own way. So essentially they'd become adopted Jews, they'd become adopted by the tribe, they'd become Jewish, and so there were a small cohort of these people who were ethnically Arab, so they were from Yathrib, their parents were from Yathrib, their parents were Arabs, and many of them had become Muslims. But now that the call to expel Banu Nadir had come, a few of the parents, the Arab parents, the Muslims, they were actually wanting their children to renounce Judaism and become Muslim. Then they can stay in Banu Nadir, they can stay in Medina, and they don't need to leave and to be in exile. So they were putting pressure on their children who were adopted in the Jewish tribes and had taken on the Jewish faith. Some of these Muslim families were putting pressure on their children to become Muslims so that they could stay. And that is essentially why this verse was revealed. The Arabs of Yathrib, they had considered the Jewish people to be far more superior. They've got civilization, they're learned, they can read and write, they've got a book, they're monotheistic, and they live in fortresses. They have an air of superiority, which is why there was this superstition amongst them. But some of the Ansar, as we say, were saying, look, we don't want our sons to be exiled. We don't like it that our own flesh and blood are to be expelled. So they were putting pressure on their children. That's when the famous verse in the Qur'an came, that there is no compulsion in religion. And again, if anything, this is something that is there to, that's, well, you could say it's in favor of, you know, people staying Jewish, right? It's not as it's commonly understood. You can't convert, people, the way Islam was spread. But the context of this revelation is that, look, these guys are brought up Jewish. You can't force them to become Muslims. Let them be to their own religion, if that's the way they choose, especially if they're adults, right? They're no longer children. They're adults. They can make up their own mind. They've chosen that path. That's for them. And like clearly says in the Qur'an that the truth is clear and falsehood is clear. So it's up to them, whatever they want to decide. And Islam, it gave these values, right back in those days, that it's important that we respect our beliefs, and our beliefs are really important. And other people, we can't force them to become Muslim. You have to win over the hearts and minds, and that's what it's all about. And again, this is very different to how other societies have functioned in the past. We all know about the Spanish Inquisition. We know around even amongst Christianity, people being forcibly converted to Catholicism or to being Protestant. That's what the English Civil War was partly about. So there's all of these things amongst the other religions, but Islam makes clear that actually no, there is no compulsion in religion. This is a conscious choice that people have to make for themselves, and so virtually all of these children who were brought up in their adopted families had taken on their new identity and had essentially become Jewish. They were part of those group that were exiled. Not, I don't think there were any, or hardly any, who stayed back on that occasion because of that. We do know that there were two amongst the Jewish families who converted to Islam. They got to stay and keep their property. Another thing that happened around about now, during the siege, or slightly earlier, so during the siege of Banu Nadir, is that the final verses on the prohibition of alcohol were revealed. So the first verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah says in translation that they ask you about gambling and drinking, tell them, it has a lot of harm and some good, but the harm outweighs the good. So that came down sort of around about the time of Badr, just before or after Badr, so fairly early in the Madani phase. And then after Uhud, there was an incident where one of the Sahabi, he was leading prayers whilst he was inebriated, he was drunk. So in Surah An-Nisa, Allah reveals, do not come close to Salah when you are drunk. So again, that's quite clear. Again, it's adding on to the concept that alcohol is not really good. And then in Surah Ma'idah, verse 91, the final verse comes: drinking, gambling, and idolatry and divination, these are all forbidden. And we know the famous stories related to that when this verse was finally revealed, literally as soon as people heard that verse, the streets were flowing with khamr, with alcohol. People were, had some had cups in their hands and they threw it down. Others were had the wine in their mouth and they spat it out. Others went to the extent that they would try to vomit it up. But nevertheless, it said that as soon as that verse came down, people implemented it immediately. It's not the people misunderstand sort of the gradual implementation, they call it, or the gradual prohibition, But when each of the verses came, the people implemented it to the utmost. There wasn't any variation in implementation. The implementation was total. This is the verse, you have to do it. It's not a question of, okay, the verses come now, I'll think about it next week, or I'll do it at the weekend. They did it there and then. There wasn't any variation in implementing the hukm of Allah. Right? There is wisdom in how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the prohibition in stages, it said. However, at each revelation, that was implemented completely. So again, in this day and age, it's important for us to recognize the importance of implementing Islam completely and not doing it piecemeal or gradually, or working on the proviso that we've got some leverage in how we implement it in our lives. So there are a couple of things to talk about. The next few things we're just going to talk about the Prophet's household, his marriages, his wives and children, because it doesn't neatly fit in chronologically to some of the other instances, and most of the books of Seerah, they're around the battles or these significant political events or geopolitical events, and they don't slot in these events around the Prophet's household in the same chronology. So so just turning it on to airplane mode. So then we talked previously that again around about this time, what we had is the Prophet had his first grandchild, who was born with the name Harb. So Ali ibn Abi Talib and Fatima, they had a son, and Ali subhanahu wa ta'ala named him Harb. The Prophet asked him, what have you named him? He said, I've named him Harb. And sort of like, and we talked about this before, it's sort of a macho name. Prophet he didn't want the Ummah to have these macho, abrasive names. So he goes, no, rather he is not war, but he is beauty, Hasan. Okay, and so he wants us to name our children with good names, and even people who are converts. There's a case where there was a lady, she had a name that meant sort of ugly or not very nice. So the Prophet said to her, look, no, that's not your name, rather you are beautiful, as in Hasana. And again, the Prophet discouraged the Muslims from having egocentric names or narcissistic names or vainful names that bring about self-pride. Umme Salama, she had a daughter whose name was Bara, which means the righteous one, or a female who's really pious. So it's self-affirmation. It is quite sort of vain to have that type of name. So again, Prophet didn't like that, a name that praises yourself of itself. So he changed her name to Zainab. So again, not to have these these types of names. And then sort of next time around when Hussein was born, the Prophet, Ali ibn Abi Talib didn't want to go through all of that, so he named Hussein Little Hasan, which is what Hussein means, Little Hasan. And we talked before that the rules of Haqiqa are around the hadith, around the birth of Hasan. The Prophet would give adhan in the right ear, and the shaving of the hair and weighing that, and giving alms or some charity or sadaqah to poor people, and it doesn't, many scholars say it doesn't literally mean you have to shave the hair and weigh it. It's just basically, you look at how much hair they have and you estimate how much you need to give, and it's of silver, not gold. So again, it's not that burdensome on people. And again, it's about the sacrificing an animal and sharing that that food with the community. And so these are some of the other events that happened. Hasan and Hussein, we know how dear the both of them were to the Prophet ﷺ. Where we know the stories that when the Prophet ﷺ, he's in sajda and his grandchildren are crawling over him, he remains in sajda until for a long time, until they get bored and they sort of slide off. And on one occasion the Prophet ﷺ was giving a khutbah, and they Hasan and Hussein, he sees them and he stops the khutbah, rushes over, picks them up, and then he excuses himself. Look, so verily what Allah says is true, these two sons of mine were tripping up and I couldn't be patient enough to let them get to me, so I needed to go and pick them up. And again, during another khutbah, the Prophet ﷺ, he took Hasan and he goes, this son of mine is a Sayyid. So it essentially means that it's one of a leader, undisputed leader, and a day will come when he will cause a reconciliation between two large groups of Muslims. And again, that's the reconciliation between the people of Ali and the people of Muawiyah. And again, we'll talk about that at some other time, inshallah. Again, the Prophet ﷺ praises Hasan and Hussein as being that these two are going to be the leaders of the youth, the young men in Jannah. So anyway, so these these are a couple of the other minor family related incidences. But the other things to talk about are the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. So we'll quickly go over that. Before we do that, actually, just talked about the grandsons. Let's just recap the children of the Prophet ﷺ. So the first one was Qasim ibn Muhammad, then there's Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, Abdullah, Fatima, and Ibrahim. So Qasim, Zainab, Ruqayya, Kulthum, Abdullah, Fatima, and Ibrahim. And then the wives, we'll just list them and then we'll just talk a bit about them, inshallah. So we all know there's Khadijah, bint Khuwalid, and the Prophet ﷺ obviously married her before prophethood. She was a widow when the Prophet ﷺ married. He was younger than her. She died before Hijrah, and then Abu Talib died as well, and the Prophet ﷺ was really depressed for a while. So and everyone noticed that. Obviously he was devastated. He loved Khadijah bint Khuwailid dearly, and the most of all his wives, so he was quite sad that she'd died, and Abu Talib, and then he was in that sort of sad state for quite a number of weeks and months, and it was suggested that he marry someone else, and so the suggestion was to marry Saudah, and we'll talk about that inshallah. And then he also did nikah with Ayesha in Mecca, and then consummated the marriage later on when they arrived in Medina. So there's Khadijah, who married and then passed away, and then there was Saudah, and then Ayesha, and then Hafsa, and again the marriage of Hafsa is around about this time. Then Zainab bint Khuziama, and again she's marries the Prophet around about this time. Uhud, after Uhud, that time. Umme Salama, and then also later on, Prophet marries Zainab bint Jahsh. Again, some say that's a controversial marriage. So of these, so Khadijah, she was a widow. Saudah, she was a widow. Ayesha, she was the only one who was previously unmarried. Hafsa, she's a widow. We'll talk about that in a second, inshallah. Zainab, again, a widow. Salama, again, a widow. Zainab bint Jahsh, she was a divorcee. Juwayriya bint Harith, she was a widow but also a freed slave. we'll talk the story about Juwayriya much later on. And then there's the daughter of Abu Sufyan, Ramla, Habiba. She was again a widow. There was Safiya bint Huyay, and we'll talk about Huyay bin Akhtab, the leader of one of the Jewish tribes. So Safiya bint Huyay, she was a freed slave, and previously unmarried. And then Mamuna, who it said was a widow as well. So there's the list of the wives, and we talked about Saudah before. She was an elderly lady. Her previous husband was someone called Sukran ibn Amr, and he was the brother of Suhail bin Amr, and he died early in the Meccan era. And when Saudah, she became a Muslim, her family disowned her, and again, so she had very little support, and again, that's one of the reasons why it suggested that the Prophet marry her, to provide her with that social support as well as companionship. And that was about the 10th year of the dawah, and she was known to be the eldest of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, and she was large in physique, and she would walk like an old large lady, and so she wasn't that nimble. And we know of that because she mentioned during the Hajj, the Prophet ﷺ's Hajj al-Wada, how she asked permission to leave early, before the crowds start. So again, and that's because that following the sort of crowds in Muzdalifah, it's really can be quite hectic. So she said, look, can I leave a bit early before things get busy and before it gets too hot? The Prophet gave her permission, and again, we take the hukam that for some people, for genuine reasons of health or whatever, they can leave early following the night, spending the day in Aqaba and then the night in Muzdalifah. Then they're allowed to leave slightly early. And later on, Saudah, she's getting older in age, and she maybe thinks that the Prophet ﷺ, might divorce her or whatever's going in her mind, but she wants to preempt that. So she approaches the Prophet ﷺ one day and she says, look, I have no jealousy of your other wives at all, and I just want to be with you so that I can be resurrected amongst your wives. And so she's basically saying, let's stay together because I want the honor of being your wife in Jannah. So I have no need of my night, and I would like to donate it to Ayesha, if that is going to please you. And so the Prophet ﷺ, so basically she gave up her night. The Prophet ﷺ would treat all his wives equally. And then sort of later on, I think it's in the 6th, the 7th year in Medina, she voluntarily donates her night to Ayesha. So the Prophet gets twice as much time with Ayesha than he does with the other wives. So rather than reducing her night and then that being spread equally, she wants to keep the Prophet happy. So and she knows this will keep him really happy. So she denotes her night to Ayesha. And it's said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals Surah An-Nisa, verse 128, regarding this. In translation, if a woman fears that her husband will abandon her or leave her or not treat her in a good manner, then she can negotiate with him, and these conditions are good. So again, that's a blessing from Allah that Ayesha got to spend more time with the Prophet ﷺ. And Saudah, she was one of those wives who died early after the Prophet's death. So she died in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and she is the first, or she's the second wife to be buried in Baqi al-Gharqad, the graves outside Medina. And there's a line of all the wives of the Prophet and they're buried next to each other. Apart from Khadijah, she's obviously buried outside of Mecca. And then we talked about the story of Ayesha as well before. So, I mean, there's some dispute as to her age, whether she was 6 or 12 or 15 when she got married or had her nikah, and then the consummation was later on in Medina. And it said that the Prophet had this recurring dream, or he had a dream where an angel was carrying this lady towards the Prophet, and when he uncovered the veil, it turned out to be Ayesha, and the angel said, "Look, this is your wife." And then after this dream, the Prophet went to Abu Bakr and mentioned this, and then Abu Bakr Siddiq said, "Look, I'm like your brother," and the Prophet said, "Well, then who then better than your brother for a match like this?" So that's the story of Ayesha. And again, she's a colossal figure in early Islam. The amount of hadith that she narrates is immense. So that's Khadijah, Ayesha, Saudah, Ayesha. The fourth wife is Hafsa, bint Umer. Now, Hafsa, again, she's married to the Prophet around about this time. She's, some say she's similar age, or a few years older than Ayesha, so maybe in her mid or late teens. She was married at a young age, around 11 or 12, to one of the early converts to Islam, and his name was Qunais. And she, Hafsa, and again, her aunt was one of the early Muslims, and that's the story of Umar's conversion. So she migrated with Qunais very early on to Abyssinia. And again, there's not much that we know about Qunais, except that he was one of the very few Muhajir who was blessed enough to participate both in Badr and in Uhud. And that he suffered some wounds during Uhud, and then Qunais died shortly after Uhud because of those wounds. And obviously Hafsa was very sad and pained, because she's a young girl, probably in her teens or early 20s, and her father, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he feels really, sorry for his daughter who's become widowed so young. So then he's looking for a suitable, noble match for Hafsa. So he approaches Uthman ibn Affan, and Uthman, obviously we talked about before how he lost his wife, Ruqayya, the daughter of the Prophet, shortly after Badr. And he was prevented to go to Badr because Ruqayya was ill. So Umar thought, well, who better than than Uthman ibn Affan for his daughter Hafsa. So he goes to Uthman and he goes, "What do you think of Hafsa?" And obviously, when a mahram, a father or someone like that, approaches somebody and says, "What do you think of so and so who's in their care?" It's a polite way of bringing a proposal. So Uthman, he stayed quiet. He said, "Look, I don't want to think about getting married right now. I'm just not in that place at the moment." But he had something in the back of his mind, and he couldn't say anything. But he made an excuse for himself. "Look, I'm still not ready to get married," and so he excused himself. And Umar ibn Khattab, he doesn't know this obviously, but the Prophet had already approached Uthman and Abu Bakr for advice around Hafsa. So the Prophet already had counsel with, not with Umar obviously, but with Uthman and Abu Bakr. Again, his trusted inner circle. And he says, well, what, just, sounding them out whether, he should be getting married to Hafsa. But Umar ibn al-Khattab didn't know this, so he can accept Uthman saying, not now. So then he goes to Abu Bakr. Now, Abu Bakr, obviously, he's still he's already married, but Umar wants a good match for his daughter. So then he goes, well, what do you think about Hafsa? And then Umar, Abu Bakr, he's in a difficult position. So he turns around and says, well, let me think about it, and I'll get back to you. And he doesn't. Days go by, and, maybe a week or two go by. And then Umar ibn Khattab, he's really, really upset by this, right? And he narrates this later on. Said, look, this was much more painful to me than Uthman's rejection, because he can sort of understand Uthman's response, but this of Abu Bakr just sort of saying, I'll think about it, I'll get back to you, and then nothing. He was just really taken aback by this. So then Umar goes to complain to the Prophet and says, look, I've gone with this proposal, and these guys, they're treating me like this. What's up? And the Prophet said, look, Hafsa will marry someone better than Uthman, and Uthman will marry someone better than Hafsa. And Umar, he didn't understand that, but then finally the Prophet himself personally went and proposed to Umar ibn Khattab for the hand of Hafsa. And then later on, so Hafsa marries someone better than Uthman, and then Uthman, he marries someone better than Hafsa, and that is obviously the Prophet's other daughter. So then Abu Bakr, he then goes back to Umar about this, and he explains it and says, look, the Prophet told him, Abu Bakr, about Hafsa himself, and he couldn't break that news. So this was a difficult situation. That's why he didn't want to come back and say no, and he was too embarrassed to face Umar about this. So then he sort of explained that, and then Ayesha, she narrates later on. Again, it's a lovely narration. He goes, look, she knows that she's very beloved to the Prophet ﷺ. She knows that, and it's clear. And again, that's one of the reasons why Saudah later on, donates her night to Ayesha. But Ayesha says, look, that Hafsa was her main competitor for the love and affection and company of the Prophet ﷺ. Again, they're similar in age, and she felt, that the main person is Hafsa, who can compete with her, being young, being beautiful, being sharp-minded as well, because Hafsa, she's got the traits of her father. She's quick-witted, she's got a strong personality, and there are even stories narrated where she would tell the Prophet her mind, and there's one story in the books of Hadith which said the Prophet may have even given her one of the 3 talaqs, then Jibreel came down to the Prophet and said, on the back of that, look, do not divorce her. She is someone who fasts all the time, and she's someone that prays all the time, and she will be your wife in Jannah. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervened by dispatching Jibreel to say, look, take her back. Don't, go through this. So again, husband and wife situation, things go up and down. There are, even in the household of the Prophet, we can see that. And the Prophet, according to this narration, was even tempted to divorce Hafsa. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervened. So these things we can expect that happen in any relationship. And on another occasion, Hafsa and the Prophet ﷺ, had a domestic, and then she's crying and she rushes over to her father, to Umer, who sees her crying, but he's in a difficult situation. His daughter is clearly upset, but his son-in-law is the Prophet of Allah. What does he do? Does he take her side? Does he take his side? So he said to, look, perhaps he had another little tiff with him. Wallahi, if he divorces you, I will never speak to you again. Okay, so he's basically saying, look, you've got to move past this. It may be tough, whatever it is, you need to sort it out with the Prophet ﷺ. I'm not getting involved. And Hafsa, she was one of the more educated women of the early Muslims. She knew how to read, she knew how to write, and she was the one who actually kept the first mushaf, the first compilation of the Qur'an in her house. So when her father Umer ibn al-Khattab, when he was Khalif and then he passed away, she essentially inherited, but she took custody of the mushaf, the original mushaf that was compiled in the time of Abu Bakr, and then she would care for that. And then when Uthman ibn Affan wanted to use that mushaf to make exact copies, 6 or 7 other copies to send to the other parts of the world, he had to get permission from Hafsa to use that. It's said that Hafsa, she died much later on, about 42, 45 after Hijrah, and one of the Khalifs, Marwan ibn al-Hakim, did the janazah over her. So that's the fourth wife, Hafsa. The other one to talk about, another couple quickly, there's Zainab bint Khuziama. Now, there's not much written or narrated about Zainab bint Khuziama. She was not from Quraysh, and she only married the Prophet ﷺ for a short period of time before she passed away. And so Zainab bint Khuzaima, she herself was a widow. She was, it said, much older in age, and she is known as Ummal Masaqeen, the mother of the poor. And this was a title, this was her kunya, even before she became a Muslim. And she was, it said, married to some say she was married to one of the cousins of the Prophet ﷺ in the days before Islam, in the days of Jahiliyyah. Then he divorced her when she became Muslim. Then she married Ubaidah bin Harith. Now, we talked about Ubaidah bin Harith. He was a very prominent Muslim, a very statesman of the early Muslims. He was one of the 3 chosen by the Prophet ﷺ to be in the Mubaraza at the Battle of Badr. So there's Hamza, there was Ali ibn Abi Talib, and there was Ubaidah bin al-Harith. And again, we talked about the story about how Hamza and Ali immediately killed their dual opponents, but Ubaidah, he clashed with had his leg badly injured, and then he died in the lap of the Prophet ﷺ later on. But she's known to be Zainab bint Khuzaima, known to be very generous, very caring, and as I say, it's said that she was only married maybe for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 8, 9 months before she passed away. And again, she's given that elevated status to be raised as the wife of the Prophet ﷺ, and she is the first of the wives of the Prophet ﷺ to be buried in Baqi al-Gharqad, the cemetery. So, as we said before, the Khadijah's obviously buried outside Mecca, and the other wives that we've talked about, they're all surviving essentially. You know, so there's Saudah, there's Ayesha, there's Hafsa, and then there's Zainab bint Khuziama, who dies after a few months. So she's the first or the second wife of the Prophet to be buried, and she's buried there. The final story about the wives of the Prophet, before we finish this time inshallah, is Umme Salama. Now her real name is Hind bint Abi Umayyah, and we've heard of Umme Salama before. She was married to Abu Salama. His name was Abdullah ibn Asad. She's one of those ladies, Salama, who was tending to people on the battlefield. She'd put water on her head in a jug and carry it to the wounded. And again, she's married to Abu Salama. She was one of the first ones to make hijrah. We talked about the story of Salama during the hijrah. Sorry about the going in the background, getting very animated. So yeah, she's one of the early ones to migrate to Medina. Abu Salama, he gets badly injured. We talked about this in the Battle of Uhud. He seemingly to recover. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he dispatches him on another important expedition, and then his old wound flares up. And then, as a consequence of that, when he comes back from this expedition, he dies. So, Salama, she's now widowed. But as Abu Salama is sort of on his sort of deathbed, he has Salama with him, and there's a lovely story that they love each other intensely. And she says, as a way of, he's clearly dying, but she says it as a way of just keeping his spirits up, to basically say, look, I'm not going to marry again. She says, look, if I've heard the Prophet say, if a man of Jannah dies and then his wife doesn't remarry, she will automatically go to Jannah with him. There will be husband and wife together in Jannah. But if a woman of Jannah dies and the husband doesn't remarry, he will go to Jannah too. So she's basically saying, look, I'm not going to, you're a man of Jannah, obviously I'm not going to get married after you pass away. So let's make this vow and promise each other to stick by this. And then Abu Salama, on his deathbed, he says to Salama, will you obey me? And she goes, yes, of course I'm going to obey you. So then he goes, marry someone after I die. He doesn't want her to be left alone. He wants her to be cared for, and that's the mentality of people in that society. They had a different relationship with people who were widowed or divorced. The social setup was that the support network is through marriage. That people support each other. So Abu Salama goes, marry someone after I die. And then he's there and he makes dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Says, oh Allah, bless her with a husband better than me, who will take care of her and will never harm her. So, the Prophet ﷺ had said in a previous hadith, and this is, Abu Salama, he's the one who recounted this hadith, says, look, never is anyone afflicted with a calamity that, they should say, do the dua, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and then, may Allah, replace me with what I've lost with something better. So as soon as if a calamity occurs and you do that dua as your first reflex, from Allah we came, and unto Allah is our return. May Allah, replace this loss of mine with something that is better. If you say that instinctively, then Allah will replace that with something better. And that's the Sahih hadith. So Umme Salama, she remembered that hadith. As soon as Abu Salama died, she says that, replace something better. But she's thinking to herself, well, who can be better than Abu Salama? And she genuinely thinks, who can be better than Abu Salama? So Abu Bakr comes afterwards, after the period is over, and he comes and proposes to her, and then she turns down Abu Bakr Siddiq. And then after a while, Prophet again, he looks at her situation, so he goes and he proposes to Salama. She doesn't say yes straight away, and this is the Prophet of Allah coming to you. But she doesn't say yes straight away. She goes, look, I'm really honoured in this proposal. I'm honoured that you're interested in me, but you should know a few things first. And the Prophet says, well, what are they? Well, look, I'm a woman who is intensely jealous, and I know you've got other wives, and I'm worried that my jealousy will manifest in a way that will displease you, which will displease Allah, and I don't want that. So I'm intensely jealous. I'm someone who's old, I'm in my 30s or 40s. I'm not young anymore, and I have children. I have a family. These three things. Do you really want to get married to me? I'm jealous, I'm old, and I've got kids. So the Prophet ﷺ says, anything else? She goes, no. Okay, fine. As for your jealousy, I will make dua to Allah, and that will get sorted out. As for your age, well, I'm afflicted with the same calamity as you. So he's making a joke out of it. Look, you think you're old? I'm old. Okay. So as to your age, I'm afflicted with the same calamity, and as for your family, well, they're my family. That's not a problem with me. They will be my children. So then she agrees, and they get married around about this time, the 4th year of Hijrah. And again, the Prophet ﷺ says to her that I will give you the same gifts, the sort of dowry, the same gifts, that the furniture that is equal to what I gave Zainab, bint Khuziama. Right? So what did he give Zainab when he got married to Zainab? He gave Zainab 2 stone mills, 2 clay jars, and a stuffed pillow. That was he hadn't gone to IKEA and bought out everything. He hadn't gone to John Lewis or Lee Longlands and really lavished him, and he could have. He's Amirul Mu'mineen. He's vanquished his enemies. He could have really, given a lot. But he said, look, I'll give you the same as I gave Zainab: 2 stone mills, 2 clay jars, and a stuffed pillow with leaves or feathers. That's a simple life that they had. And he spent 3 days after the marriage with her. And again, he says, if you're marrying someone who's a widow, if you've got more than one wife and you're marrying someone who's a widow or a divorcee, you spend 3 nights with them. If there's someone who's not been married before, or a virgin, they basically spend 7 days and nights with them. So he spent 3 nights with Salama. And again, she's the 6th in total wife of the Prophet ﷺ, the 4th at this time, because Zainab and Khadijah have passed away. Again, we know how wise she is. She's not immediately jumping at this proposal from Prophet ﷺ. She's laying out the caveats, the conditions almost, she's narrated, I think, over 300 or 338 sound hadith, again, many of them to do with the family life of the Prophet ﷺ. So, she's very, critical in our life as a Muslim ummah, and she's the one who gave the really good advice after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The only time the Prophet ﷺ was really angry with his companions. he's ordered them to do something to shave their heads, because after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, they couldn't go to Mecca, which is the express purpose to do Umrah, and it's unheard of that anyone stops them from doing Umrah. It goes against international law, all laws. But then, the delegation from Mecca came. They stopped outside of Hudaybiyah. They came up with the treaty, and the treaty was, you're not going to go do Umrah this year. You can come back next year, but not this year. And he signs the treaty, and everyone is really upset. And he's given them the order to shave their heads, and no one's doing it. And he's exasperated, and he goes to Salama and says, look, have you seen these guys, my Sahabi? I've told them something. They're not doing it. They're disobeying me. And she doesn't make a fuss of it. So look, calm down. We came for a purpose. They're upset. You should go ahead and do it yourself. Don't sit and negotiate with them. Just stand up. Just do it. As soon as you do it, they will follow you. And she was exactly right. The Prophet ﷺ, he then went, shaved his, hair, and then after that, all the Sahabi, they got the message. They rushed, and they were rushing, fighting over each other about, shaving their own, hair, and Umme Salama, she lived a long age. She died, I think, in the 59th year after Hijrah, and Abu Hurairah led her janazah, and again, he was really old as well. So these are the sort of getting us up to date with the situation of the household of the Prophet ﷺ. He later on marries Zainab bint Jahsh, and we'll talk about that story. That's in itself a long story. So just to go over things, whilst it's Maghrib, there's Khadijah, Saudah, Ayesha, Hafsa, Zainab bint Khuziama, Salama. Then there's going to be Zainab bint Jahsh, Juwairiya, Ramla, Habiba, Safiya, and Namuna. So anyway, it's Maghrib time now. I'll finish there. Do remember us and the Ummah in your du'as. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. جزاك الله خير. السلام عليكم.